My wife turned our marriage into a feminist chore-chart experiment. She gave me a guide on how to be a good husband. So I followed every rule and watched it backfire on her. Hey Reddit, my wife handed me a 17-page framework on how to be a better husband. I just nodded and followed it exactly. Here's what went down. Name's Kai, 35 male. For 4 years, my wife Grace and I had a good thing going. Met at a college alumni mixer when I was 28 and she was 26. She worked in HR for a medical supply company. I was in supply chain management for an industrial equipment distributor. We got married after dating for 18 months and things were good. We worked well together. She handled social planning. I handled practical stuff and finances. We split chores without drama. Some weeks she did more, some weeks I did more. Never kept score because we trusted each other. Money-wise, I made about $68,000 to her $54,000. Not huge, but enough that I covered about 60% of the bills. Mortgage on our townhouse in North Phoenix, car insurance, utilities. She handled groceries and her student loans. Never kept score. That's what partners do. Then, 6 months ago, Grace reconnected with her college roommate Roxy, worked for some nonprofit that existed to host workshops about dismantling the patriarchy. Never married. Never kept a relationship past a year. Somehow became Grace's advisor on how marriages should work. Weekly brunches turned into daily phone calls. I watched my wife transform. Started using phrases like emotional labor, an invisible workload in conversations about taking out the trash. Roxy was poisoning the well, dropping comments about how Grace deserved better, how she shouldn't have to ask me to do things, how my existence as a man meant automatic systemic oppression. Fun stuff. I came home one evening to find them at our kitchen table with printed articles about emotional labor. Roxy was highlighting sections with a yellow marker, like she was preparing Grace for an exam. They both went quiet when I walked in. In February, I had to travel to Dallas for 3 weeks to oversee a supplier integration project, the longest we'd been apart since getting married. And apparently, those 3 weeks were when Roxy went from background noise to main character in my wife's head. Grace called me twice during the trip. Both times I could hear Roxy's voice in the background. The second call, Grace asked me weird questions about how I valued her contributions and whether I saw her as an equal intellectual partner. That didn't sound like her at all. I asked if Roxy was writing her script. She hung up. I came home on a Thursday evening expecting maybe a hug and some reheated leftovers. What I got was Grace standing in our hallway, holding a stapled document that looked like someone's graduate thesis. She didn't even let me put down my duffel bag before launching into this rehearsed speech about restructuring our entire marriage. The document was titled Framework for Equitable Partnership, a Comprehensive Restructuring Plan in Times New Roman Font. Page numbers. The whole deal. She told me to sit at the kitchen table, laptop already open with spreadsheets and color-coded charts. I noticed a second coffee mug on the counter. Roxy had been here helping with this intervention. Grace explained that during my absence, she'd attended an intensive feminist workshop Roxy recommended. 2 full weekend days that rewired how she viewed our relationship. According to her new perspective, our marriage was built on me exploiting her invisible labor, benefiting from privilege I refused to acknowledge, and traditional roles she wouldn't tolerate. The document had 3 sections. Section 1, Emotional Labor Redistribution. I was now responsible for remembering all birthdays, planning social events, managing our calendar, sending thank you cards, checking in with families, everything she claimed she'd been doing alone. Section 2, Household Management Equity with a point system. Vacuuming worth 9 points, grocery shopping 13 points, cooking 11 points. Everything assigned values. We'd split points 50-50 weekly. She'd created a spreadsheet to track it. Section 3, Deconstructing Masculine Defaults. Guidelines on how I should communicate feelings, rules about mansplaining and taking up space, suggestions for how I should sit during discussions to appear less dominating. Apparently, I sat with my legs too far apart, and it intimidated her. My first instinct was to laugh because this felt like performance art, like someone was pranking me with the most over-the-top Reddit creative writing exercise. But Grace wasn't smiling. She was staring at me with this intense expectation, like she was waiting for me to either bend the knee or prove I was exactly the problem she'd decided I was. She had tabs marking important sections, a pen ready to take notes on my reactions. It was an evaluation. She told me she knew this would be hard for me to hear, that men usually get defensive when confronted with their privilege, that she'd prepared herself for me to argue or dismiss her concerns, because that's what her workshop warned her guys like me always do when women stop accepting things. Here's where I made the decision that set everything else in motion. I looked at her calmly. Flipped through the pages one more time, nodding along like I was reviewing a contract. Then I looked up and told her she was absolutely right. That if she felt this strongly about it, clearly I'd been missing something important. And that I was willing to implement her system exactly as she designed it. Every single rule, every single point, every single guideline, word for word. Her face went from defensive to completely shocked and then to something like triumph. She actually hugged me. "I'm so proud of you for being open-minded," she said. "This is going to make our marriage so much stronger, and we'd be an example for other couples who are stuck in old relationship patterns." What she didn't know was that I'd already spotted every flaw in her framework. She'd built this thing based on ideology she'd absorbed from Roxy and that workshop, but she hadn't thought through what real equality would actually look like. She wanted fairness measured and documented. She wanted every contribution tallied and balanced. She wanted proof that everything was exactly equal. So that's exactly what I was going to give her. That night, she was buzzing with energy, talking about how revolutionary this was going to be, how we were going to prove that modern marriages could move past old structures. I asked questions about her point system, made sure I understood every single rule. She went to bed looking happier than she'd been in months, convinced that she'd finally gotten through to me. I stayed up late reading through her document, treating it like the legally binding contract she'd basically turned our marriage into, and I started making plans of my own. Monday morning started with coffee duty. According to Grace's alternating schedule, week 1 was her responsibility. I got up at my usual time, showered, got dressed for work, came downstairs at 6:45 expecting coffee to be ready, because that's what the chart said. The kitchen was empty, coffee maker was cold. Grace was still asleep upstairs. Normally, I would have just made it myself, made enough for both of us like I'd been doing for 4 years. But that wasn't how her system worked. Her system said each person handles their assigned tasks without someone else stepping in to smooth things over or pick up slack. So I waited, checked emails on my phone. She finally stumbled downstairs around 7:10, looking confused about why there was no coffee and why I was just standing in the kitchen staring at an empty pot. She seemed annoyed, said something about oversleeping and how I could have just made it this once. I stayed calm and pulled up her document on my phone. Showed her the exact section where Monday coffee duties were listed under her responsibilities. Her week, her rules. She made the coffee badly. Used too many grounds. Forgot we were low on filters and had to dig through the pantry. The whole thing took 20 minutes when it normally took 5. I ended up leaving for work 15 minutes late with lukewarm coffee. But more importantly, I stopped by my bank on the way to work, opened a separate account and started moving money from our joint savings. We had about $34,000 in there. Over the next few weeks, I'd transfer exactly half into my individual account. If we were doing equality, we were doing it right. That evening, I told Grace about another change. Since she wanted measurable fairness, we were splitting expenses 50-50 now. Mortgage, utilities, insurance, groceries, everything. I'd been covering 60% for 4 years. That ended today. She looked at me like I'd just suggested we burn the place down. I started arguing that my income was higher, so it made more sense to split things based on what we made. That splitting everything equally wasn't really fair when we made different amounts. I pulled out my phone and showed her the section in her framework about equal distribution of labor and responsibility. Asked her why household tasks needed to be split exactly 50-50, but money didn't. Where was the logic in that? She didn't have a good answer. Just said I was being petty and taking things too literally. I told her I was being exactly as literal as her framework required. Over the next week, I followed every rule with surgical precision. Tuesday evening, she got home from work looking stressed. Mentioned she had a headache. Normally, I would have grabbed her some medicine from upstairs and brought her water. But personal care assistance wasn't on my task list, so I nodded and went back to my laptop. She stared at me for a solid 10 seconds, waiting, then got up and got her own medicine. I heard the bathroom cabinet slam. Tuesday night, she mentioned her parents wanted us over for dinner on Saturday. Just dropped it casually while we were watching TV. Normally, I would have checked our schedules, maybe suggested bringing wine or dessert. But according to Section 1, social planning with her family was entirely her emotional labor to manage now. So I just said cool, and went back to watching the game. Saturday came around. We had nothing set up because she'd completely forgotten to follow through. Her mom called around 3 p.m., sounding hurt and confused, asking where we were. I watched Grace scramble to explain that we got our wires crossed, that she'd call later to reschedule. After she hung up, she shot me this look like I should have reminded her. I showed her the framework section about family coordination being her job. Wednesday evening, our kitchen trash was overflowing so badly that stuff was balanced on top of other stuff in this ridiculous tower of garbage. She gave me the universal spouse look that meant, You see this situation, right? I checked the chore chart on the fridge. Trash wasn't mine until Thursday morning, so I shrugged and went back to my laptop. She ended up taking it out herself around 9 p.m., made sure to sigh loudly while doing it, so I'd know how put out she was. Friday evening, we ran out of laundry detergent. She mentioned it casually. I acknowledged the information, but didn't offer to pick any up, because household supply shopping was her responsibility that week, according to the spreadsheet. By Sunday night, I could tell she was getting frustrated. Not at the system itself yet, but at me for following it so exactly. You're being too difficult on purpose, she suggested during a discussion about meal planning for the week. I mean, you're taking things too literally, missing the spirit of what I'm trying to do. Oh, really? I replied. Which parts of the system do you want me to ignore? And why are these parts less important? Are some rules more equal than others? She didn't have a good response to that. What made this work wasn't that I was being mean. I was being perfectly fair by her definition. She'd built a system that sounded progressive when Roxy was helping her workshop it, but she hadn't considered what it would feel like to actually live inside it. Meanwhile, I was quietly documenting everything. Screenshots of expense splits, copies of her framework, dates and times, building a file that would be useful later. 3 weeks into the framework, and Grace decided the system needed an upgrade. She'd been spending more time with Roxy, multiple coffee dates weekly, long phone calls where I'd hear phrases like setting boundaries and refusing the bare minimum. She came to me with communication protocols to control how we discussed disagreements. Anytime I explained my perspective using logic, she had a label ready. Logical deflection, defensive rationalization, masculine resistance. All straight from Roxy's playbook. I didn't argue, just made mental notes. Then I built my own document, called it the Reciprocal Accountability Framework, same formatting as hers. Section 1. Financial Transparency. Since we were measuring household labor, we'd measure economic contributions too. I created a spreadsheet tracking every dollar, listed exactly how much more I'd been contributing for 4 years. That imbalance needed fixing. Section 2. Technical and mechanical responsibilities. Fixing things, managing technology, dealing with tools, physical labor. These were now her responsibilities on alternating weeks. Section 3. Emotional accountability. Every time she cried to shut down arguments. Every time she used silent treatment. Every time she made me feel guilty for having boundaries. All documented as her patterns needing examination. I presented it Saturday morning. Her face went through confusion to defensive anger when she realized my framework held her to the same standards. She argued it wasn't the same thing, that I was missing the point. I reminded her she wanted measurable equality. Now everything was being measured. Both sides. From that point forward, I stopped doing any of the small things I'd always done without thinking. Stopped being the person who smoothed over rough edges and made life easier in ways she never noticed. She needed her phone charger from upstairs while we were watching a show. Normally, I would have grabbed it during a commercial, but retrieving her personal items wasn't on my task list. So I stayed on the couch. Tuesday night, the internet went out. I kept working on my laptop using my phone's hotspot. Watched her struggle with the router for 20 minutes, unplugging wrong cables, getting more frustrated. Eventually, she figured it out. Took her 3 times longer than it would have taken me. She mentioned needing to pick up a prescription before the pharmacy closed. I acknowledged the information, but didn't offer to do it or remind her later. Managing her schedule was her responsibility now. She wanted to order dinner, but her credit card was in her purse upstairs. Looked at me expectantly. I looked back and waited. She eventually went upstairs herself. The point system was creating absurd situations. She'd wash dishes to earn her points, but leave the counters dirty because wiping them down was technically a separate task worth different points. I'd vacuum the living room for my points, but ignore the side tables that needed dusting because that was categorized differently in the spreadsheet. One night, she asked me to help her reach something on a high shelf. I checked my phone. Assistance with household access wasn't assigned to anyone. We both just stared at the item for a minute. Then she grabbed a chair. We were both following the rules exactly, and our townhouse was somehow getting messier and more chaotic, despite all the documented effort. Thursday afternoon, Grace called me at work. Roxy's car had broken down, and she needed a ride home from her office across town. Wanted to know if I could leave early and help out. I told her Roxy could call for a ride share, or use whatever feminist mutual aid network she was always posting about online. She hung up on me. That evening, she informed me that Roxy would be joining us for dinner on Saturday. Not asking, telling. I told her that was fine, but since Roxy was her friend, Grace would be responsible for all the cooking, cleaning, and hosting duties associated with having a guest. Equal labor distribution. She looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Are you serious right now? I can't do all this alone. Your rules. Saturday came and Grace spent 4 hours cooking and preparing while I sat in the living room working on my laptop. When Roxy showed up, I just said hello, offered basic pleasantries, then went back to what I was doing while they talked in the kitchen. I could hear her throwing poison in Grace's ear all evening. Phrases like financial coercion and strategic incompetence. And this is exactly what the workshop warned us about, floating through the wall. At one point, Roxy came out to use the bathroom. Gave me this smug look like she'd already won something. By the time Roxy left, Grace was wound up tight. Sunday morning, Grace started the conversation I'd been expecting. We need to talk. This financial split is not fair. I make less than you, and this feels like a punishment. I showed her the spreadsheet. How much more I'd paid over 4 years. Under true equality, she'd need to pay me back about $19,000 for the imbalance. She stared at the numbers. This is financial abuse. How is equal contribution abuse? I asked. She couldn't explain it, just said it felt wrong. She called Roxy, put her on speaker. Roxy immediately launched into textbook financial abuse, using money to control her, proof of everything they'd discussed. I pointed out that equal contribution by definition cannot be abuse. If Grace wanted splits based on income, she should have said that. But she wanted equality. Roxy told Grace to stand firm, not to let me reframe this, then hung up. Grace didn't talk to me for the rest of Sunday. Silent treatment in full effect. By the end of week 3, our townhouse felt like a war zone. 2 people following rules. No actual partnership. No actual connection. Just constant scorekeeping and resentment. Exactly what I knew would happen. Week 4 was when everything went to heck. Tuesday, our bathroom sink clogged completely. Plumbing was her technical responsibility now. Grace tried chemical drain cleaner. Made the bathroom smell like a pool, but fixed nothing. By Thursday, the sink was unusable. Grace was brushing teeth in the kitchen. Finally asked if I'd really let our bathroom stay broken when I could fix it easily. I asked what part of the technical responsibility framework she wanted me to ignore. She called me petty, childish, said this proved I'd never cared about making things work. I reminded her I'd been making things work for 4 years. She decided that wasn't good enough. Friday, washing machine died mid-cycle. Trapped wet clothes inside, made horrible grinding noise, then nothing. Grace called me panicking, expected me to leave work and fix it. I reminded her mechanical failures were her category, told her I had confidence in her ability. She accused me of sabotaging our marriage, making her life harder on purpose. I told her I was giving her exactly what she asked for, complete equality. She spent 2 hours trying to figure it out, called a repair service. Earliest appointment was Tuesday, 5 days away. That evening, she loaded garbage bags of laundry into her car for the laundromat. Gone over 3 hours. Came back exhausted. Told me the place was depressing. Machines ate quarters. Someone took her clothes out early. Saturday morning, Grace's mom had a medical emergency. Grace juggled coordination all day. I watched while drinking coffee. Family emergencies on her side were her responsibility. She looked at me desperately. I asked if she needed me to do something specific. She shook her head. She ended up spending the whole day dealing with her mom's situation. Didn't get home until almost 8 p.m., looking completely wiped. I'd already eaten dinner because cooking wasn't my responsibility that day and she hadn't been home to handle hers. She walked into the kitchen, saw me sitting there with my empty plate, saw the stove and sink clean with no food for her, and something in her face just cracked. Are you really going to sit there and just watch me struggle? Hey, Grace. Don't hate me. Does our marriage mean that little to you? You're weaponizing my framework against me instead of being my partner. I'd been your partner for 4 years, Grace, I shot back. I'd been contributing more money, handling most of the problems, and making our life work without needing a spreadsheet. You decided that wasn't good enough. She'd made her choice, built her system, made us follow it. Now she was upset that the system actually applied to her, too. You've changed. You're not the person I married. You're becoming cold and mean. You're right, I told her. I've changed because you turned our marriage into a transaction instead of partnership. And if we're doing transactions now, I'm going to make sure they're fair. She called Roxy again, put her on speaker without asking me. Roxy immediately started in on how men always find ways to mess with equality, how I was showing my true colors. I let her go on for a minute. Then I calmly listed out every way Grace had changed since reconnecting with Roxy. How she'd gone from happy partner to resentful auditor. How trust became suspicion. I told Roxy directly that she'd poisoned my wife against me because misery loves company. Grace looked shocked. Roxy started screaming through the phone. I walked out of the room while they talked. That night, Grace slept in the guest room. By this point, the money transfers were complete. Half of our joint savings sitting safely in my individual account. All legal. All exactly fair by her standards. Because I'd been preparing for the endgame since the moment she handed me that first framework document. Week 5 was when the system fully collapsed. Monday morning, the garage door opener died. Both running late. Wouldn't respond to remote. I asked if she wanted me to override the system or handle it herself. She didn't answer. Started pulling the manual release, couldn't figure it out, getting panicked. Finally yelled at me to help. Said this was insane. I showed her how it worked. Got the door open. Both 30 minutes late. That evening, she didn't come home until after 9 p.m. No text, walked in and went straight upstairs. Wednesday, I got a text from Roxy. Long message about destroying Grace's mental health. Threat that I'd regret this. I screenshotted it, added it to my documentation file, blocked her number. Thursday evening, Grace broke the silence. Said we needed to really talk. She looked exhausted. Told me she felt trapped. The framework wasn't working. Everything felt harder and lonelier. I asked what she actually wanted. Not what Roxy told her. Not what workshop said. What she really wanted. She couldn't answer. I told her I'd spent 4 years trying to be a good husband, and she'd torn it down based on theories from people who'd never kept what we had. She started crying. Said she was sorry. That she'd made a mistake. Wanted to go back to before. I asked if she was apologizing because she understood what went wrong, or because consequences were affecting her. No good answer. Friday morning, I had a meeting with a divorce attorney. Just a consultation. My documentation would be valuable. The money transfers were legal. I was in a strong position. Friday evening, Grace asked if we could go to dinner. Try to reconnect. She'd made a reservation. I told her I had plans. She asked what plans. I told her they were my plans and didn't need her coordination or approval. I actually just stayed home and watched basketball. But the point was that I didn't owe her my time or attention anymore. We were two individuals with separate responsibilities and separate lives who happened to share living space. She ended up going to dinner with Roxy instead. Came home around 10 p.m. Just went to sleep in the guest room again. Saturday morning, I woke up to find her sitting at the kitchen table with both our frameworks printed out in front of her. All those pages of rules and categories and point systems. She looked like she'd been up all night. I can't do this anymore. Then she started crying. I'd been feeling invisible in our marriage for a while before you left on that work trip. Everything I did felt unnoticed and unappreciated. Roxy and the workshop had given me words for feelings I'd been having but didn't know how to express. She thought if she could turn our relationship into a system with clear rules and measurements, she'd finally feel seen, but it just made her feel completely alone. Every interaction had become a transaction. Every gesture had to be evaluated for fairness. Every moment of connection was now suspect because it might throw off the balance. She admitted she'd become exactly what she accused me of being: rigid, controlling, unable to see past her own perspective. Said the framework had sucked all the humanity out of our marriage. I let her talk without interrupting. When she finished, I told her something I'd been thinking about for weeks. I said she was right that I hadn't always acknowledged everything she did, that I probably took some things for granted, that I could have been more appreciative. But her solution wasn't to have an honest conversation with me. It was to completely restructure our marriage based on ideology from people who didn't know us, to bring in outside influence that poisoned her against me, to replace trust with suspicion and partnership with scorekeeping. And now she was sorry because the framework wasn't working, not because she understood why it was wrong. She asked me what we were supposed to do now, how we could fix this. I told her I'd been thinking about that too. Then I told her I wanted a divorce. She stared at me for about 10 seconds like I'd spoken in a foreign language. Then she started laughing. You can't be serious. Couples have rough patches and work through them. You're just trying to scare me into backing down. No, Grace, I'm completely serious. I already talked to an attorney. I'd been preparing for this since you handed me that document 5 weeks ago. She froze. The laughter died immediately. Her face went pale. She set down her mug. What do you mean by preparing? I pulled out my phone, showed her the screenshots of every framework rule, records of changes, logs of who did what, financial records showing the historical imbalance. I told her I'd also moved half our joint savings over the past month, about $17,000 into my individual account. All legal, all exactly fair by her standards. Her expression shifted from shock to panic. She started talking fast, saying I'd misunderstood, that she'd been stressed and confused, that Roxy had a bad influence on her, but she saw that now, that we could work through this if I just gave her a chance. I asked her where all this reasonableness and flexibility was 5 weeks ago when I came home from Dallas. Where was the willingness to communicate and compromise when she was handing me a 17-page document outlining my failures as a husband. She didn't have an answer. She asked about the money, said it was unfair when she'd been counting on it. I reminded her she'd wanted equal financial contribution, so I'd taken my equal share. She called her attorney that afternoon, came back looking shaken. Her lawyer told her my documentation was solid. The money transfers were legal. The framework showed she'd demanded the changes. She didn't have leverage. She showed me the consultation bill, $300 for an hour. Asked if I'd split it with her. I reminded her we weren't splitting expenses anymore unless they were household related. Tuesday morning, she switched tactics. Told me I was cruel, that I'd manipulated everything to make her look bad. I asked when we'd had a conversation about problems before she came home with her framework, when she'd tried talking instead of ambushing me with a document. She said she'd been dropping hints for months. I should have noticed. I told her adults use words, not hints. Wednesday evening, Grace showed up with Roxy, apparently for backup. They sat me down in my own living room and tried to have an intervention. Roxy launched into her speech, how I was showing abuser patterns, how the financial split was economic abuse, how my following the framework was psychological warfare. I let her finish, then turned to Grace and asked if she actually believed any of this. Grace looked between me and Roxy. I could see the conflict on her face. She told Roxy she needed to talk to me alone. Roxy looked betrayed, started arguing that this was what she'd warned about, that I'd isolate and manipulate Grace. After Roxy left, Grace sat back down looking exhausted. She asked me if there was any way I'd reconsider, any chance we could try counseling or separation instead of divorce. I told her that 5 weeks ago, if she'd said she felt unappreciated and wanted better communication, I would have been all in. But she brought ideology into our marriage, turned every interaction into a measurement of inadequacy. Now she wanted to act like it never happened. She started crying. What am I supposed to do now? You have until the end of the month to find a place. I'll pay my half of the mortgage during that time. Not a penny more. You need to handle your own moving arrangements. She looked at me like I was a stranger. You're being cruel. I can't believe you're doing this to me. I'm being fair. Thursday morning, I filed the paperwork, sent her a copy by email. She called crying, begging me to wait, said she'd cancel the frameworks, start over, do anything. I told her we were just executing the logical conclusion of her system. Friday evening, I came home to find her packing. She'd found an apartment 3 miles away, moving out next week. Boxes everywhere. Our wedding photo was already wrapped in newspaper. I noticed she was taking the coffee maker, the one that had started all this on that first Monday morning. Perfect. She asked one more time if I was sure. I told her that partnership needs 2 people who trust each other. She'd made clear through her actions she didn't trust me and didn't want to work together. She wanted to audit me, measure me, find me lacking. I deserved better than that. The divorce moved fast. No kids, no major assets besides the townhouse. Clear documentation, legally separated within 3 months. I bought out her half of the townhouse. She took the money and moved. Tried to stay friends on social media. I blocked her everywhere. The day she moved out, I changed the locks. Just because the townhouse was mine now and I wanted a clean break. Hired a cleaning service after she left. They found her framework document under the bed. I threw it in recycling. Kept the furniture, though. No reason to let ideology ruin a good couch. Focused on myself. Started gym more consistently. Lost 15 pounds. Got back into mountain biking. Started playing poker with guys from work every other Thursday. One of them asked me once why I seemed different lately. More relaxed. I told him I'd stopped living with a performance review system disguised as a marriage. He laughed. Thought I was joking. Got promoted to senior supply chain manager 4 months later. Decent raise, up to about $77,000. Turned out not being stressed about frameworks made me more productive. Started seeing Hannah 6 months after separation. Project manager at a construction firm. No drama. She was simple. Fun. Grace's life went the opposite direction. Heard she doubled down on Roxy's influence after the divorce. More workshops. Active in online feminist communities. Made her entire personality about leaving an abusive relationship. Then, about 8 months in, the fallout started. Grace posted something on social media painting me as a financial abuser who'd stolen money and left her broke. A whole dramatic story about manipulation and gaslighting. Went semi-viral in her circles. The problem was, mutual friends knew the actual story. Knew about the frameworks. Knew about Roxy. Started pushing back. Things got messy. Then someone found and shared Roxy's threatening text to me. The abusive husband narrative fell apart. People started asking questions. Wanted to see these frameworks Grace kept mentioning. Someone asked why a financial abuser would carefully document splitting expenses exactly 50-50. Grace's online community turned on her fast, called her out for weaponizing abuse language. Roxy tried defending her but made it worse. Grace got kicked from several groups for drama. The friendship with Roxy imploded shortly after. Turned out Roxy had been talking behind Grace's back, telling others Grace was weak for being upset, that she'd failed the test of true feminist commitment. Someone showed Grace the messages. Roxy didn't deny it, said Grace needed hard truths. Grace cut her off, lost that entire social circle. Workshop friends sided with Roxy or just disappeared completely. Turns out when your whole personality is based on being a victim, people get tired of the act pretty quickly. Job-wise, Grace had been complaining about her workplace to her communities, talking about patriarchal structures, toxic male colleagues, named her company. Someone from her company saw it, reported to management. She got fired 10 months after our divorce. Social media violations, creating hostile environment, couldn't find another HR position, took whatever work she found, administrative assistant for less money. Then, 13 months after we separated, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Grace looking like she'd aged 5 years. Completely defeated. Her car had a dent in the front bumper that hadn't been there before. Parking lot damage she probably couldn't afford to fix. The inspection sticker on her windshield was 2 full months expired. Kai, can we talk? I stood in the doorway. What do you want? I need help. I'm behind on rent. Lost my job. My friends abandoned. Roxy turned everyone against me. I don't have anyone now. And I need money. Just a few thousand to catch up. I'd pay you back as soon as I can. I looked at her for a long moment. This woman who'd thrown away 4 years because it wasn't perfect enough for theories from a workshop. I asked where Roxy was now, where all her workshop friends were, where those people who'd supported her journey had gone. She started crying, said she'd made mistakes, that she'd been wrong, that she understood what she'd lost. Asked if I could please just help her this once, for what we used to have. I told her I'd spent 4 years being her partner, being someone she could count on, and she'd decided I was the problem. Decided our marriage needed to be torn down according to outside standards. She made her choice, built her system, followed her ideology. Now she was living with the consequences. Complete independence, complete accountability, just like she wanted. She asked if I'd really just let her struggle, turn her away when she had nowhere else to go. I told her she had the same place I would have had if the situation were reversed. Nowhere. Because according to her framework, we were separate individuals with separate responsibilities, not partners who support each other. She was living in the world she created. I hoped she'd learned something. I closed the door while she was still standing there crying. Through the window, I watched her walk back to her car. It took her 3 tries to get the key in the door. Then she just sat there in the driver's seat, not moving. I closed the blinds, went back inside, grabbed a drink, put a game on TV. Phone buzzed minutes later. Grace sending long apologies, saying she understood she'd destroyed everything, asking if we could talk. I blocked her number. She sent an email that night. More of the same. I marked it spam and filtered anything else from her. Sometimes people need to face consequences, need to understand actions have reactions, that you can't tear something good apart based on ideology and expect to rebuild it when the ideology fails. Grace wanted equality, measurement, documentation. So I gave her exactly that. Fair consequences for her actions, measured responses, documentation of how her choices led here. She built the system, insisted we follow it, kept it going when it was obviously failing. Now she got to live in that world, without me. A couple months later, I heard Grace had moved back with her parents in Scottsdale, found part-time data entry work, still single, still struggling. I'd moved on completely. Hannah and I were getting serious. No frameworks, no scorekeeping, just 2 people who enjoyed each other. Sometimes at night, I think about what Grace said on my porch, about understanding what she'd lost. She didn't understand what she had until it was gone. Me? I learned my lesson too, that you can't build a life with someone who sees you as a problem to solve instead of a partner to value. That your worth doesn't need proving through spreadsheets. I'm good. Guys, we are so close to hit 100,000 subscribers on this channel. If you are not subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing. It really helps hit that 100,000 mark. Thanks for making this dream come true.